Well, the principal reason we need more roads is because there are more automobiles. Detroit is turning out automobiles to the tune of 8, 9, 10 million a year, and we are not discarding automobiles at the same rate, probably about half that rate, with the result that the people who own, or let's say the families who own one car are now becoming families who own 2 cars or 3 cars, which in turn means that there are more cars on the highways every year. As a result, the streets have become so congested that they aren't very livable anymore, and it's necessary to build highways, or freeways as we call them, expressways, as some people call them, that are tailored to the needs of the motorists and have very high capacity.
I think the thing that really interested me in transportation is the fact that I believe it's the number one problem in Baltimore City today. Baltimore, whether we like it or not, is behind in its transportation study, its transportation development. Other cities have developed, like Los Angeles, tremendous expressway and freeway systems. Cities like Toronto, Canada, have developed a combination of both. I've seen both, and I think that Toronto's answer is the proper one for Baltimore. I think a city which has a modern, comfortable, fast, and effective, and I emphasize the word effective, that is something that works, transportation system, is a city that's going to be a city of tomorrow. And I think a city that tries to outbuild Detroit and tries to build roads to keep up with the population is going to be a city that wrecks and ruins itself, will be the city of yesterday. And I think Baltimore is at the crossroads. And I think we are going to go one way or the other. And I think we're on the wrong path right now, where we're trying to build 7 freeways inside the city limits of Baltimore. And I feel that this is wrong, that we should change it, that we should combine roads with some other form of transportation. And that other form of transportation is subways and on-surface rail transit. And a combination of the both is the path to tomorrow.
Man's roads and highways have often been the subject of philosophical comment. When well constructed, they have been praised as one of man's great creations. When primitive, they have been satirized, as in the old epigram that went, "This road is not passable, not even jackassable." Rarely in the past, however, has the need for a road been questioned. But the 20th century has changed all that. Today, a road is not necessarily just a well-constructed or a poorly constructed road. Today, a road may be a subject for heated philosophical and political debate. Its very reason for existence is often challenged by those who feel we must stop, or at least slow, the frantic pace of highway construction the automobile has forced upon us. For since the invention of the noble gas burner, the number of roads in our nation's cities alone has increased so that their combined lengths would stretch 20 times around the equator. Last year, Americans spent more money to run their cars than was spent on housing all American families. More than twice as much as was spent on educating our nation's children from kindergarten through college, and the end is not in sight. Baltimore and Maryland, like most other cities and states in the nation, plan still more miles of highways for the future. A future that many critics charge may belong to the concrete society. Just west of the Baltimore City line, construction is taking place on an engineering creation that resembles a cross between the Golden Gate Bridge and the Baths of Caracalla. This is the giant interchange where Interstate Highway I-70N will hook up with the Baltimore Beltway in a maze of concrete runways, columns, and tiers. Some look upon the completion of this object with excited anticipation because they feel it will be another step in relieving traffic congestion in downtown Baltimore. Still others are revolted at the sight of the interchange because to them it is just another symbol of a losing battle man has been fighting for more than half a century. That battle began here in the streets of a downtown area that were laid out for wagons, horse cars, and pedestrians. For a long time after the invention of the automobile, nothing much was done to cater to the traffic needs of downtown. Occasionally, streets were widened or repaved with something less shattering than cobblestones, but for the most part, the automobile was not then considered an object of worship. It was not until after World War II that Americans got the car religion. Then car ownership began to increase, and concessions were made to the car's needs. Parking facilities downtown replaced buildings. Streets were labeled with one-way signs. Much on-street parking was banned, and it began to be important to remove obstructions to rapid motor travel. At about the same time, public transportation systems began to experience an economic decline. On January 1st, 1949, Baltimore's transit company increased its fare from the traditional dime to 2 tokens for a quarter, and the trend was established. Additional fare hikes drove passengers into the arms of used and new car dealers, and this was followed by further attempts to economize on public transit expenses, such as switching to buses. Each service cutback was followed by loss of passenger revenue as more and more people switched to private cars. By 1950, there were just over 40 million registered cars in the United States as a result of this switch. 4 years later, there were 48.5 million. By 1958, there were 56.9 million. And in 1963, 68.5 million registered cars. Projected figures predict 91.4 million cars on the road by 1975, and more than 100 million by 1980. Further, the 1960 census pointed out that 64% of American workers traveled to and from their jobs by private automobile. Only 12% patronized public transit facilities. In their attempts to keep pace with the needs of the motorists, state and local governments began widening existing roads and building additional highways and parking facilities, despite the assertion of Owen and Smith in The Transportation Dilemma of Modern America that cars were increasing 5 times faster than roads. In 1956, this trend toward road building as a solution to congested cities and narrow rural highways was given a boost by the passage of the Interstate Highway Act, which was to provide non-stop, limited access, high-speed travel on some 41,000 miles of rural and urban freeways, all designed with gentle grades, broad curves, and generous interchanges. The system was to be completed in 16 years at a total cost of $41 billion. Best of all, local governments could receive 80 to 90% of the cost from the federal government. And of course, Maryland and Baltimore were happy to receive funds from the new act because the city's old roads were not adequate to carry increased traffic loads. Prior to the 1950s, Baltimore was served by a group of highways that had been widened, but not much else since colonial times. Route 1 bisected the downtown area on its way to Philadelphia in the north and Washington to the south. Route 45 led from Towson to York, Pennsylvania. And Route 40 connected Frederick in the west with Baltimore City, Philadelphia, and New York. In 1950s, much was added. First, there was a new wide expressway linking Baltimore and Washington. A harbor tunnel was added in 1954. A new road to Harrisburg and York in the north, connected with the Baltimore Beltway, ringing the city and tying in with the harbor tunnel. The Northeastern Expressway, rechristened the John F. Kennedy Expressway, was opened in 1963. And the Jones Falls Expressway led into the downtown area. Then, in the early months of 1965, the Baltimore City Council ran into a temporary roadblock. Political wrangling over the route of the southern leg of the Jones Falls Expressway and indecision over the route of the East-West Expressway brought a warning from State Roads Commissioner John Funk that Maryland might have to return federal funds it had already been granted. The city fathers reacted with appropriate shock. Appalled at the thought of losing federal funds, the City Council quickly resolved its differences and approved a route for the Jones Falls extension by a vote of 19-1. The lone dissenting vote belonged to Councilman Thomas Ward of Baltimore's 2nd District. Long an opponent of the Automotive Trust, Mr. Ward feels that freeways are fine for rural areas but have limited use in the city. An outspoken advocate of mass public transportation as a solution to congested cities, Councilman Ward views the construction of urban freeways as a threat to the entire downtown area.
The interstate highway system that we're presently talking about in Baltimore is just the beginning. We've heard about the loss of federal money and so forth. But what people don't realize is that in addition to the interstate highway routes which are planned, like the Jones Falls and the East-West expressways, that the State Roads Commission also has 5 other freeways planned for the city of Baltimore. And how many Baltimoreans who live in Roland Park, for example, or on Loch Raven Boulevard, or over near Hartford Road or Blair Road know that an 8-lane freeway is planned through the center of one part of their neighborhood, and another 8-lane freeway is planned through the center of another part of their neighborhood? Or how many people in northwest Baltimore know that they've got a little 8-lane freeway planned through their neighborhood? The cost in houses? I don't know. 25,000 houses, how many families? I don't know how many families live in a house. What happens to the surrounding neighborhoods? I don't know. What would happen to Roland Park or the area around Cold Spring Lane if the present plans of the State Roads Commission and the Department of Public Works are carried out? How many people know that an 8-lane freeway is going to cut right through the area that they presently occupy? How many people over near Charles Street and Cold Spring Lane know that there's going to be a big interchange there, and so on? The cost of the present highways is just the beginning. It's the beginning of a massive road building program which will not help the city. I believe it will be disastrous to the city. We have got to start some other form of transportation. You cannot outbuild Detroit. You've got to build something else. Subways. It's the only answer.
According to an exhaustive study made by the consulting firm of Wilbur Smith and Associates, Councilman Thomas Ward's figures are accurate. No less than 47.5 miles of freeways are planned within Baltimore City at a total cost of $418 million or $8 million a mile. The projected plan calls for completion of these roads by 1980. In addition, the Wilbur Smith report recommends completion of 108 miles of freeways in counties surrounding Baltimore City. The overall picture includes construction of I-70N from the west to the center of the city, Route 83 linking the Jones Falls Expressway with Route 95, the eastern portion of the East-West Expressway, the construction of a new road to Washington paralleling the still comparatively new Baltimore-Washington Parkway, the building of an Arundel freeway to ease traffic on Ritchie Highway and Route 3, a northwest freeway paralleling Reisterstown Road, which will join the Cold Spring Freeway, and a northeast connector joining Perring Parkway, and several additional roads, including an Outer Harbor Crossing, Patapsco Freeway, Windlass Freeway, White Marsh Freeway, and Southeastern Expressway. Then, finally, the entire system will be ringed with an outer beltway reaching halfway to the Pennsylvania line. The most difficult part of this system to construct will be those areas within the city itself. Management Technology Incorporated, another consulting firm, estimated that for just the 18 miles of concrete comprising the East-West Expressway, 4,400 homes, 143 garages, 90 businesses, 7 churches, and 367,000 square feet of docks will have to be uprooted. But one of the strongest objections to urban freeways is the problem of human relocation, an unenviable task that will be handled by the Baltimore Urban Renewal and Housing Agency.
We know that the East-West Expressway and the Southwest Expressway will displace a great many people, several thousand families, in fact. However, we do not, at this point, know the exact number. Estimates have been made, but we believe that new developments have made it possible to revise our original estimate downwards. I'd like to make one point very clearly at this time, and that is that all public improvements, public housing, urban renewal, highways, schools, displace only about 2% of the people who move in Baltimore every year. In fact, Baltimore is noted for its high mobility rate, especially among the lower income groups. The federal law requires that no family may be required to leave its home through public improvement without having been offered a standard home. We know now that 86% of the families who have been displaced by public improvements and whose whereabouts are known have been relocated in standard homes. In the vast majority of these cases, these homes are far superior to the ones that they left.
Another objection to urban freeways is an economic one, for each mile of new roadway removes between 40 and 50 acres of taxable property from municipal tax rolls. The outstanding alternatives to highway building, subways, or rapid transit systems are not easy for the taxpayer to accept. Rapid transit systems that are modern and efficient are also expensive. And further, they are not subsidized by the federal government in the same lush manner as the freeway system. Generally, voters must approve costly bond issues in order to finance rapid transit systems, but this problem has not always proved insurmountable. Baltimore's delay in even considering rapid transit on anything more than a piecemeal basis stems primarily from fragmented planning. Years ago, when the state of Maryland had a much smaller population, the need for roads became critical, and justifiably, a strong state roads commission was formed for the purpose of building a good highway system. Under these conditions, however, the voices of mass transport advocates have been subordinated to those who favor more highways, and only recently has interest been shown in developing anything resembling a coordinated and balanced transportation plan.
Recently, I submitted a transportation plan to the Baltimore City Council. And at that time, I invited all of the responsible officials who are concerned with highway and mass transportation planning to listen to it. The City Council came and they listened to it, and a lot of other officials of the city were there. And basically, if I could boil down my plan into one thing, it is that it balances roads and mass transportation. Some roads I do recommend. Some interstate highways I recommend. Some of the big freeways I recommend. Most of them I recommended against. And in place of them, I substituted subways and on-surface rail rapid transit. I have my report, and it went into such things as how much is the tax rate going to be increased by roads, something that the Department of Public Works never bothered to find out. And I found out that it is a substantial cost to the city in lost tax revenue, for example, roadbed only. And I found out how many industries are going to be thrown out. To some extent, how many jobs are going to be wiped out. This is the basis of my report. In assessing the overall cost, I find that with some of the highways that are planned, in fact, a good many of them, the cost is far too high to the city of Baltimore to balance against the relatively little gain that we will get. And therefore, I am calling for a coordinated transportation system, a system which brings together all parts of transportation, so that when we are through, you'll be able to go around Baltimore comfortably, either in mass transportation or on the highways.
The problem with mass transit, and I think a subway system would be good for the city, but the problem is this, that first of all, the Parsons, Brinkerhoff, Quaid, and Douglas study, which will soon be out, will recommend a system, no doubt, which will include a subway, generally along 33rd Street up near the stadium, on Fayette Street on the south, along Park Avenue on the west, and along Broadway in that's sort of a quadrangle. And it will feed, of course, the Hopkins, John Hopkins Hospital, John Hopkins University, the downtown area of Baltimore, and the stadium. Now, that is a very good thing to have that sort of a subway system. But what has to be done, this has to be sold to all the people that this is a good thing because it has to be financed by a bond issue. So it's going to take a lot of selling. And as a result, there is a time element involved here, which means that you may be able to sell in 5 years, you may be able to sell in 3 years, Hopefully you may be able to sell in 2 years. After that, you have to begin construction. I worked on subways myself when I was a cub engineer. It takes time to build subways, with the result that we would be standing still in Baltimore for 10 years without any transportation system downtown unless we proceeded with the freeway system at this time.
United States Senator Joseph Tidings.
If our great cities, like Baltimore, Washington, New York, are going to survive and flourish, they must develop balanced transportation systems. Unfortunately, under the present federal highway subsidy, the local and state officials have no option. They either take the funds and use them to build great throughways into and through the cities, or they get no money at all. I think this is unfortunate, and this is the reason why I co-sponsored the Tidings-Bingham Act, which would permit the state and local officials to have an option to use the funds already allocated for the cities for highways to be used either for federal roads or for mass transit. In other words, they would have the option, the local officials. I think that they can make a better judgment than someone sitting behind a desk in Washington. And I think that it's absolutely vital that our cities have a balanced transportation system and not depend solely upon highways or solely upon any one means or method of transportation.
There can be no doubt that the American freeway is here to stay. The question is whether what works so well in the country will work equally well in the city, or the quickest, most efficient way to move 100,000 people across 1 mile of space in the open country may be by car, but in the city, it may ultimately turn out to be the slowest, most expensive way.
Hey, it's Jamie Costello. If you just enjoyed this episode of The Vault, you can check out more episodes by clicking on this box down here. And while you're at it, go ahead and hit that circle, and that'll subscribe you to WMAR 2 News for great content every single day.